to introduce Victoria to you. Victoria is a freelance writer and PR person. She's well known for her book about Kilsey show, which is called Studs and Crooks. And she's the daughter of a local well-known athlete and coach, Roger Ingham, who I'm sure many of you will have heard of over the years. And as a result, she spent her childhood visiting many of these northern racing events. And that has led her to write the book about Ingleborough's sporting legacy, Peak Performance. And that had the backing of Stories in Stone. And so it's going to be on that book and all about the research that she did that she's talking tonight. So I will hand over to Victoria. All right. Thank you, Victoria. Unmute.
Unmute yourself.
Oh no, I've muted you.
That's it. That's great.
Now, am I unmuted? Yeah. Right. So I'll press that and where's it on? Share. Okay. And then watch that. Okay. So John, could you just put your thumb up if that's looking like it should do? Okay, sorry, moment of concentration there. I just needed to know we got, you know, the technology working. The first thing I want to say is I'm absolutely delighted to be invited to do this talk about my new book. So thank you very much for having me. So Pam's already probably told you a little bit about me, but just to sort of recap on some background information about myself. I am a features writer and author, and so I'm sat here on this picture here with Studs and Crooks, which is the book that Pam referred to. And indeed, my early life was steeped in Yorkshire Dales and Lakeland community sporting events. So literally spent pretty much most of my childhood stood in a field somewhere, I think, watching men, it was mainly men in those days, or boys, and maybe a few girls, running up and down the nearest hillside. And I loved it. It was a complete immersion. It was just my childhood, my life. I knew all the events, I knew which weekends they fell on, I knew who the great runners were, the ones to watch, the ones who might win, you know, the contenders coming up. So that was, it's just part of sort of the fabric of who I am. So I spotted Yorkshire Dales Millennium Trust Stories in Stone had advertised funding for the historical and cultural Ingleborough focus projects, which I'm sure you're all aware of all the good work that they've done and all the different projects that have come out of that. And it was just something I saw in the Craven Herald probably a couple of years, I can't even think now, a couple of years ago, in the summer, saying they had a little bit of money left and they were keen to kind of use it up with local projects. And it coincided with, I'd literally just spent the day at Ambleside Sports, and now I'm a grown-up. I take my dad, obviously we were sort of part of the family always going to Ambleside Sports when I was little, and now I've got children of my own. It's become a tradition where I take my family and my dad's the passenger. And this must have been like the third year where we'd gone past Clapham and Ingleton, and he told me the story of all these amazing sports that used to take place in the sort of the landscape and who ran and what was happening. And so it was just one of those fortunate things where, yet again, and it was really starting to sink in that something amazing used to go on in the landscape that is no more. And then I saw this in the Craven Herald, and I just sent a quick email just saying, is this the sort of project that you might be interested in funding? And the answer came back as yes. So it started, I've put the aim of the book there on the next point. It did actually start in my mind as a booklet, but as these things happen with projects like this, you don't know what information you're going to get until you start. And I started to get, it gradually came together, and I was getting quite a lot of information, and it began to turn into something that was worthy of a book rather than just a booklet. Okay, so that's me. So I need to just turn over my page. So where to start? This picture that you can see on your screen, wave your hands around if you can't for some reason, is probably where it just was the place to start. My dad had this picture in his sort of big collection. I wouldn't call it an archive. It is a not very organised collection, but it's organised to Roger. And this was the picture he gave me. And this is Bill Teasdale, the legendary King of the Fells, Bill Teasdale, who was winning fell races throughout the sort of 50s, 60s and 70s, winning the Ingleborough mountain race in 1955. And it's just such a brilliant picture. You know, there he is winning, coming through the crowd with Ingleborough behind. So this was a great place to start, and I started with the mountain race in my mind. I quickly realised there wasn't any charted history for the Ingleborough mountain race. There was no results. There was results sort of going back to about the David McGonigal was very helpful. He had results going back to a certain point, maybe the late 70s or 80s. And then there was some more results online that sort of bridged another 10-year gap, and then that was it. There was nothing going back further than that. So that felt like a good place to start. And so my first photo find gave me the impetus to start with the Ingleborough mountain race, as there was no charted history or results. My aim, as with all the work I do, my writing work, was to speak to as many people as possible and get stories and anecdotes. I think if you're just researching and you're using books and newspapers, it can all become very dry and very third person. I've always found with my writing, whether it's just a feature for the local paper or you know, or the last book I wrote, if you can get somebody that's, you know, immersed in that subject, that's the expert, to share their knowledge and their wisdom about it and their experiences, you just get gold dust. It's magic. So that was my aim with this book, was to try and somehow get the memories of the people, particularly for the sports that are no more, which I'm just going to mention in a minute, which is, oh, did I miss that out on the other one? Sorry, yeah, I'll just recap on the aim. So my aim was always to pull together for this book the sports for the Ingleborough and Three Peaks area, past and present, which is, just to recap, because I'm not sure I made this point really clear, but that's the Ingleton sports, which subsumed the mountain race into it, although the Ingleton sports has now gone away and it is just the mountain race. Clapham sports, another sports that is no longer, and then also to sort of capture the full history of the Three Peaks race, which obviously continues to this day, the Three Peaks cyclocross, and I kind of partway through the project realised I really needed to include the Fellsmen as well, because it once upon a time started in Grassington and finished in Ingleton, and now it does the reverse, and it starts in Ingleton and finishes in Grassington. So that was the aim, and to bring those sports past and present to life with stories and anecdotes. So basically the first thing I did was, I think I'd gone to the Ingleton Gala, and I was speaking to all the people that were organising it, and I just came away with a whole list of names and telephone numbers, started phoning those people. They would be saying, oh, I don't really know anything, so here, I'll give you some more telephone numbers. And I must have made, I don't know, hundreds of phone calls, it felt like. But as you'll see, eventually the jigsaw started to come together. And I also used social media. I used this picture. I put this picture out on social media and on all the sort of community websites and social media pages. And I think I created a poster, and that went up in a few places. So some of my favourite discoveries, or some of my earliest discoveries, I would say, which really started to sort of take me, you know, make me feel like I was going where I needed to go, was the first Ingleborough mountain race winner was Leonard Howarth, and he won it in 1934. And it was a story I was eventually able to confirm and embellish through newspaper archive reports, and really got some amazing extra information from the newspapers. But it was lovely in that one of the first responses I got on Facebook was from Leonard's niece, who said, you know, just a simple message. I think my uncle Len won that race. It was the first one, which was just amazing, just to get that piece of information from somebody in the local community. Meanwhile, I'd been trying to get in touch with John Bentley, but he was very ill. I don't know, you're probably aware, he's the chap that wrote the Ingleton book, and he's a local historian and archivist. But Bernard Bond, who had worked with John, I can't remember how me and Bernard came to be in contact, but it was Bernard who gave me these two pictures here, which was just brilliant. And from those pictures, Leonard's niece was able to identify from the bottom picture there that Leonard was the chap on the left, which is interesting because I kind of thought it looked like it should be the guy on the right, just from the body language, but Leonard was the chap on the left. So what did we discover about the first Ingleborough mountain race? These are actually, again, I thought this must be the second year of the race because the crowds are so thick, there's so many runners running. No, these are pictures from the first Ingleborough mountain race, which I was able to confirm through the papers. It was an absolute regional sort of spectacular story. It really, obviously, the knowledge that the race was coming, photographers came and the crowds came to watch it. But it all started with a bet in the local pub, as these things do. That some chap who was a cross-country runner in his youth had bet that there were few men who would be able to, maybe I shouldn't say men, few who would be able to run to the top of the mountain back in less than 100 minutes. So in the event, 12 people, which came back within the 100 minutes, which is phenomenal. So they had a really good field running. The weather on the day was absolutely horrendous. It looks pretty wet there, as you can see. I think most of the mountain was shrouded in mist and fog. People obviously, again, as you can see, were not particularly attired for running. They've got boots and trousers on and jackets and goodness knows what else. So the checkmen that had set off ahead of the race to get to the top of the mountain to stamp the runners as they turned, never made it. They got lost in the mist. And the front runners, which were Leonard, who in the event won, and Reg Hainsworth, who I'm sure there'll be people out there in Zoom land have heard of Reg. He was a founding member of the Cave Rescue Organisation, and just, I think, a very popular local man involved in all sorts of outdoorsy things. He was sort of neck and neck, I think, with Leonard, and they passed the checkman who was wandering around in the mist, got the stamp from him, got to the top. Leonard stamped his own vest, and Reg said, "Give me the stamp, I'll wait up here and I'll stamp some of the runners," which was an amazing, amazing spot in action. Reg miraculously still made it down within the 100 minutes, so he was one of the 12. And I love the story about the boy who's of 12, obviously health and safety wasn't what it is now, who was in the race, who made his way back off the mountain by following a trail of orange peel. So people who've read the book will remember that, no doubt. So that was a great start, and then the book obviously goes on to chart the sort of the full kind of from that starting point in 1934, the twists and turns and how the mountain race has developed over the years. Another of my early favourite discoveries was finding or being put in touch with or somehow meeting Ken, who's here today listening. Ken, as I'm sure you all know, he's obviously very much a key member of your society, is custodian of the William Bond collection, which is just a huge archive of cuttings and books and documents about Clapham, which I'm sure you're all aware of. So I think Ken got in touch with me. Ken will probably know, I can't remember, just to say, this is who I am and I've got this, which was brilliant because Clapham sports, which have their roots back in about the early 1800s, linked to, like Ingleton, the early Ingleton sports did, linked to the fair with the animal fair. where there would be the animals showing and buying and selling, and the dancing and drinking and sports, community sports. So Ken was able to furnish me with quite a lot of newspaper cuttings to have a look at, and which was good because there was not very much in the Craven Herald archive and the other archives I was looking at about Clapham sports. It wasn't as widely reported as Ingleton. Where I'm losing my thread here. Yeah, and the minute books, that was it. Yeah, and he had the minute books from the sports, which dated back to the turn of the sort of early 1900s, right up to the last sports in 1963. So they were invaluable in piecing together the kind of the twists and turns of the sports were happening, now they're not, and why they weren't, to their actual sort of demise, and when they decided to sort of once and for all wind down the sports in 1963. Another discovery, I think this was another one made on social media, was well, there was a few ladies in the village, a couple of ladies in the village with access to cine films of Clapham sports. One of the ladies, all the films were at the Yorkshire Film Archive, so I didn't in the end decide, you know, it was worthy to go there, because there was one that I could actually look at, and that was from I think it was from I've got it written down here somewhere, 1954, I think, or was it cine film? Yeah, 1954. And no speaking. It was a cine film of the sort of village festivities over the sort of the year, I think, and the sports were part of it. But it was very evocative. It was just a few minutes, and you could see because they used to have trotting with the horses and hound trails. But it was a very male event. It was a lot of men, hardly any women on this cine film. Men all in overcoats, belted up, trilby hats, race cards, pens, all very serious stuff. So moving on, other fabulous finds. On the left here, we've got Gilpin Bland, and I was cock a hoop when I realised that Gilpin had wrestled at both Ingleton and Clapham sports in the 1920s. He's a very, very famous name in Cumberland and Westmoreland wrestling. I've got a bit of a spiel here to tell you how good he is. I can read out. So between 1919 and 1938, Gilpin, who hailed from Lupton Hall Farm, won the World Heavyweight Championship twice, the 11 stone championship 4 times, the 11 stone Grasmere championship 6 times. And so in the early years of his career, he was wrestling at both Clapham and Ingleton and earning money. And these sort of early wins gave him the money to afford a motorbike, which then kind of got him going out to all the prestigious events in the Lake District. This picture, I managed to get in touch with his son, who's part of this whole sort of wrestling dynasty that carried on from Gilpin with his 5 sons. And so this was a picture that was loaned from his son, Chris, also who used to be a Cumberland and Westmoreland wrestler. Again, the pictures on the middle and the right contain this chap here called Robert Morehouse. And this was a delightful discovery, a delightful find. I was pretty much towards the end of the book, and I thought I kind of, you know, with the chat, it was sort of done really. It just needed a lot of proofing and a bit of tidying up and things like that. And then just a sort of an email came in from somebody. It was like she was a physio, and it was like a friend of one of my clients says that her dad won the Ingleborough mountain race, and if you phone this number, she thinks she might have some photos. So Julie phoned the number, and basically I think Dad had recently just died, Dad being Robert Morehouse, and they'd found in his effects a suitcase full of photos, programs, notebooks, just loads of things to do with his earlier life as a runner before he had his family. And he was a pretty prominent runner, and getting photos from that era is really, really hard. There aren't many. It was mainly the sort of press who would take photos, not your sort of rank and file person, particularly to keep them and have them there. And there was little notebooks that contained all the the fell races he'd run in each year, and what the date was, and how much he'd won, what position he came, and what his winnings were. There was just so many amazing things. So here he is, he's Robert Morehouse. He's stood on the sports field in Ingleton here, and there's the old station behind him, and he's obviously receiving his prize. He came second in 1946, and from 1947 to 1949 he came first. And the picture on the right, he's to the right, so I'm guessing, I don't know, just because of the position, that chap in the middle must have come second. That's possibly 1946 there. But the interesting thing here is that this daughter said, oh, and Dad held the record, but all the information I had didn't say that Dad had held the record. So I went back through it again, and I discovered that in the year that the first, which year was it? His personal best in 1948. Yeah, it did, in one paper in actual fact, which I hadn't picked up originally, say he'd broken the record for the race. So, but in the following year's publication, it said he hadn't. So lots of digging and going backwards and forwards and trying to sort of piece all this together, and armed with the knowledge that his daughter said he kept this cutting in his wallet till the day he died, that said he had the record. They'd actually added an extra lap on that year in 1948 when he won, an extra sort of lap of the show, of the sports field, which meant the race was longer than it was the year before and the year after, which did mean indeed he had a new record. So it felt really nice to be able to embolden him at the back of the book in the list of results, and you know, make sure, because he seems to have been slightly lost in posterity, that, you know, he was acknowledged of indeed having the record for a few years. So a couple more pictures here of, because these, I just didn't want to not include them in this slideshow because they're just so cracking of these pictures. We've got Robert here at Lofthouse in Nidderdale, leading out Maurice Metcalf and Norman Stubbs, and this is in the late 1940s. I mean, it's just a phenomenal action shot. To get an action, often the sort of pictures you get are the ones like on the right, we finished the race and we've got our arms around each other. But to get an action shot like this where it's not even that blurred, I mean, he's a little bit blurred, is just brilliant. And these were two very, very prominent runners. Norman Stubbs here, who's coming out third. He won the Ingleborough mountain race in 1951. And then over here, you've got Robert, clearly the winner again. This is at Dent Sports in 1948. And he's beaten the chap that I told you was the legendary Bill Teasdale here. He's on the, this is before Bill's won the Ingleborough mountain race in 52 and 55. And this is Norman Stubbs again. Just to put it into perspective, I don't know if I mentioned, I think Bill won the very famous Grasmere Guides race 11 times and Kilty Crag race 7 times, which are like the creme de la creme of the fell races. So, you know, it's a brilliant picture. So Robert really was a shining star. You know, he really was a prominent runner of the day. And also just behold the kit that they're wearing. You know, you can get a really good view of these leather heavy fell boots they've got on, and these thick cotton baggy shorts with the that have been through the washing machine. Well, there wouldn't be a washing machine in those days. They've been washed a few times. It's just fantastic to see that these chaps are achieving times and achievements that really aren't that dissimilar to what people are achieving today. And when you consider that today's athletes, you know, they've got all the sort of the tip-top performance gear, you know, quick drying. There's nothing quick drying about any of this that these chaps are wearing. So, yeah. So one thing leads to another. So I feel like I'm talking to myself because I can't really see anyone. But anyway, I'll keep carrying on. So, yeah, so what's been...
We're definitely still here, Victoria.
One of the joys, I suppose, of, you know, embarking on a massive research project, when you just literally, you know, give me more, because you're just trying to get the best stories and the best anecdotes for you know, for a book or a project, is like you know, getting an interview with somebody and then they tell you about somebody else, and it, you know, and again, I call it gold dust. It's just like, oh, you know, this is brilliant. So Dave Hodgson, who very prominent runner, he's got all sorts of accolades. He's one of my peak pioneers in the book, especially for his 56 years of service to the Three Peaks race. I've met Dave before because I've written about the Three Peaks race in the past, but I wanted to sort of probe him more about his memories, stories, and does he have any pics of the race and things like that. And I couldn't believe it. He actually had the telephone number of the first race organiser. The first Three Peaks race in 1954 was organised by a chap called Fred Bagley, who also won the race. And this is Fred here. I don't know if you can see my mouse cursor. Fred's the chap on the left with the big, really big, heavy fell boots on. So I couldn't believe it. You know, Fred's in his early 90s, still alive. I phoned him up, and what such a lovely chap. Memory as sharp as anything. Had these lovely stories which I've included in the book about, you know, why him and his friend decided to put on a race, and then, you know, just the sort of the simple fun of it. You know, it was just, we, you know, they'd heard that people were achieving these times for running the Three Peaks, so they thought, oh, let's do a race, let's see what we can achieve. And then for that to turn into this iconic event, you know, from such humble beginnings, is really fascinating. So we've got the second, so news travels fast, because the first race, 3 competitors, Fred won. The second race, you've got the lineup just there at top right, from the start, the then start at the Hill Inn in Chapel Dale. And then we've got the 1964 race here. That's another picture taken from the book. So it was just one of those events that it just kept snowballing and snowballing. I mean, anybody who lives in Horton in Ribblesdale now will know that it's like, you know, epic proportions, you know, in terms of the coordination and the amount of runners they have. So yeah, so another nice sort of from one person to the next person. Mark Richmond is the current organizer of the Three Peaks cyclocross, and I've interviewed John Rawnsley in the past. Again, I've done a little bit of writing on the Three Peaks cyclocross, but I knew John Rawnsley was very, very poorly, so I went to Mark Richmond, and I thought I'd just use my old notes, because I never throw anything away. I sort of use my old notes from my original interview with John. Mark impressed on me. He said, John will so want to know that you're doing this book. He'll so want to be involved. You must phone him. So I did, very nervously. He really did want to meet me. I literally sat down to talk to John. 2 months before he died, he was very, very poorly, but he wanted me to go to his house. He wanted me to ask any questions that, you know, I had of him. He wanted to show me some pictures, so that was just invaluable. There's a picture coming up on the next slide which John allowed me to make a copy of, which was his favourite picture of himself from the race. So I really wanted to include that in the book. And then another sort of quirk which I was delighted about was John had the details of Kevin Watson, who was the first person to take their bike around the peaks, the Three Peaks. So that he was the famous 14-year-old schoolboy who took his bike around the peaks in 1959. So again, I had a really great chat with Kevin, and he had a lovely picture that's in the book of himself with his bike on the peaks, and he's got the whole story of, you know, him and his family going out for the day and how it all sort of came off, which ended up being the inspiration for the, you know, the now iconic Three Peaks cyclocross. So here's John. This is John's favourite picture of himself coming off Whernside in 1980 in the race. And this is a lovely picture here on the right. Anybody who's currently got the book won't have this in their book, because I've pretty much sold out of the first edition. So I've paid for another, out of the money that I made from the first edition, I've got another edition basically. So we have a second edition of the book, which has literally just landed at my house, and I wanted to make it well, I wanted to go through and just make sure that I didn't have any typos in it, for one thing, which I think I might have found one. But I wanted to update the back to reflect the race results at the back. I wanted to update those and make sure that, you know, we're freshening the book up for 2021. And you know, I mentioned that there wasn't any races last year because of COVID, so that there was those amends made. And then just in the process of you know, the liaising with people last year, a gentleman sent me this picture and said, oh, I wish I'd known you were writing the book. I've got this picture I took of the 3 Peaks cyclocross. This is going up Simon Fell in 2017. And he said, if you ever do a reprint, you're welcome to use it. It's called Stephen Smith. And so that's in the book, which is a lovely addition. So I've had a little bit of a rejig of the cyclocross section to sort of incorporate that picture. Other nice kind of segues, I suppose you could call them, from Chris Wilkinson to Victoria Wilkinson, quite a family. So Chris Wilkinson's here on the left. This is a brilliant picture. I love these kind of vintage pictures. They're very much my thing. Of you know, and they've got vintage clothes or cars or whatever. I love all that. So this is Chris coming off Ingleborough in 1972. He's en route to Sellside, then he's just got Pennygent left to do, and then he won it. He won the cyclocross, and he was the first Craven local to do so. So Chris doesn't live far away from me, so it was great to sit down with Chris and get all his stories about the cyclocross sort of back in the day, and the training he did and things like that. Loved his story about in this race when he's coming off Pennygent and he's literally just on, you know, en route to the finish line, that his handlebars started shaking loose, and he managed to swap his bike with just some random bystander and finish the race on somebody else's bike. So that's a lovely story. Chris's daughter is the very well-known Victoria Wilkinson, an international athlete. She was world junior mountain running champion when she was a teenager. She's won pretty much everything going. She's won the Ingleborough mountain race. She's won the 3 Peaks race. She actually set the current women's 3 Peaks race record in 2017. She brought it back to Yorkshire. And she's also won the women's cyclocross, and they're the only father-daughter duo to both have won the event, which is brilliant. This is the year Victoria didn't win the 3 Peaks, though. But it's still a nice story. She'd fallen, and there's a bit of a line about in the book about the fact that she made her hungrier than ever to come back and win it, because she wasn't happy with second place at all. So more connections and further discoveries. So another person that is a great friend and mentor of mine, David Joy, who, for those that I'm sure most of you have heard of him, he used to be the editor of the Dalesman back in the 80s, and he's written so many books about the Yorkshire Dales and the Settle Carlisle line and railways in the Yorkshire Dales in general. Anyway, so one of my first ports of call when I, you know, Stories in Stone had given me the go ahead to write the book, which was amazing. I thought I must see what David's got in his Dalesmans. So David's got the full collection of Dalesmans, and he's let me borrow the various ones with bits and bats that would mention anything to do with Ingleton and Clapham and Ingleborough mountain race and things like that. So what I discovered was in the 1982 edition of the Dalesman was just a little letter from a reader saying that her dad had it was just a little kind of, you know, my dad was this great Yorkshire Dales sportsman back in the day. He'd won the Burnsville Classic twice, and he's got this album full of, this scrapbook full of certificates. And he, you know, used to go to all the sports round and about, you know, including Clapham sports and Ingleton sports. And it was just a tiny little like reader's letter. So I thought, oh, I wonder if, you know, this is interesting. I wonder if anybody, you know, this was 1982, so does this lady still, is she still alive, or is there anybody else connected to this chap, Jim Leeming, still alive? So sent off various emails to like Slaidburn Parish Council, and anyway, a few weeks later I got an email from this Slaidburn archive, which I didn't know there was one, I'll be honest with you. It never even occurred to me to think that there might be an archive, and they said, you know, we've heard that you're looking for information on Jim Leaming. We've actually got quite a lot in the archive about him, and we also know who's got this scrapbook that you mentioned, and we can get it in here for you to have a look at. So so this is Jim Leaming. He was a very humble man, but a great athlete, particularly to have won the Burnsall Classic twice in 1921 and 22, I think it was. And in this scrapbook, loads of examples of things like this. If you can ignore the fact that somebody's written on in sort of felt tip, in the book it doesn't have this on. My designer managed to take things like this off, but it says ye old English sports at Clapham. I think I can't see because I've got John on top of but yeah, so at Clapham, and he'd won £3 in the mile race, second place. And there was another envelope for Ingleton, and there was, you know, there was certificates for horse, all in the 1920s, all 100 years ago. You know, sports at Barnoldswick, sports at Bentham, Burnsall, where else? Ostwick, Malham, Hawes. Brilliant. So I mean, obviously the book's a little book, so I just included just the sort of the prime example, really. But it was interesting to just spend that time in the archive learning more about Jim and Slaidburn, life in Slaidburn in the early 1900s. Slaidburn had one tap, and the whole of the village used to share this tap when this chap was little, when he was growing up. And there used to be this annual emptying of the composting toilets onto the village vegetable patches. You know, like everybody had to do it in unison, sort of once a year, just emptying the composting toilets. So just for me, just stuff that was just mind-blowing, really. His only means of transport was a bike. So to get to Burnsall or to get to Hawes, he had to cycle to Hellifield and then get the train. And it was just incredible, really. You know, we've got everything's so convenient now, and it's just so interesting to sort of dip into this chap's life. And, you know, realise that his passion for sport and running and competing, you know, just overrode all these ridiculous complications and difficulties that there were to sort of go and do that. Other connections and discoveries. If you remember earlier, I said about getting on the phones and phoning half of North Craven. Eventually, I did manage to speak to some people who could remember Ingleton sports and Clapham sports. It took a long time, and I was just thrilled to bits when I was able, when the person on the end of the phone was Bob Brown and Bernard Gill. They don't live together, by the way, but yeah, fantastic. So Bob Brown was a farmer who was a horse rider, and he rode the trotting horses. So on the next slide, I can just show you a picture of, this is Bob, and this is Bob's in the trotting at Morecambe harness races. They did give me some pictures of him trotting at Clapham, but they weren't good enough for the book. They were too pale and far away. So I don't know, I'm sure most of the people out there listening just now know what trotting is. These days you tend to see it with the sulky, which is the cart, and the hopples around the horse's leg, and the driver sat in the sulky driving the horses. And it takes place at Hellifield now, and still at Kilnsey, but it used to happen all over. And they had the trotting at Ingleton Sports, and they had the trotting at Clapham Sports. And clearly, I think in those days, it would either be mainly a saddle trot like Bob's doing here, or it would be a mixture, as you can see. So it was wonderful to, again, I think Bob's about 90, just to get his memories of preparing for the races. And he rode this chap here, he's Bill Waggett. He was one of the real stalwarts of the sports at Ingleton throughout the 40s and 50s. because the big thing in Ingleton was they wanted to use the mountain race and the sports to raise enough money to buy the village, the sports field. That was the major driver to buy the sports field for the football field. And so this is Bill as a sort of an elderly gentleman in the 1980s with his most famous horse, Dale Star. But back in the day, Bob was riding his horse and riding his horses and training them. And in his lovely stories in the book about Bill making his wife take her stockings off at the sports, take your stockings off, taking the stockings and putting them in each ear of the horse to sort of settle the horse down, and so that because he was being distracted by the noise of the crowd. And the other chap, Bernard Gill, that I mentioned on the other page, his family's farm was just behind the Ingleton sports field, and so he remembered all about the hound trails and the puppy trails, and it was so nice to get those first-hand stories about these events that no longer take place in the landscape. So yeah, so like I said, I think at the beginning it was a sort of a slightly late entry. But I suddenly thought I need to include this, and luckily I managed to find the right people and piece together some, because again, the Fellsman, this is Yorkshire's original ultra, that's the Fellsman. Not much has really been written about it, there's not much really out there. I'd like these pictures that I've put together here, just for the simple reason you've got Fellsman in the 60s in the top two pictures, and Fellsman kind of now, and it's that incongruity about the difference in how people tackle these things with what they're wearing. So you've got the heavy boots, the trousers, the woolly jumper, and the knapsack, and down here you've got the chap with all his lightweight, rainproof, high performance clothing on, ascending Ingleborough. These top two pictures were loaned to me by Alan Stockdale, who was a serving member of the Upper Wharfdale Fell Rescue, and every year, for quite a number of years, they used to put a team in. And I just love Alan's story. This is the picture actually that's not in the book, so I just thought it was a great opportunity to use it here. So you'd walked 55 miles from Grassington to Ingleton, and so where do you have to sign off? At the top of these steep stairs in Ingleton Town Hall, and I just thought that was quite funny. But thankfully it was opposite the pub, so they just needed to sort of stagger that out again, and job was done. So more information about the Fellsmans in the book. We've got the stories from Alan from the early days, stories from Phil Carroll, who was one of the organisers for many years, and Ian McGee, one of the recent winners, and Emma Hopkinson, who's also a recent female winner, and Nikki Spinks, who's the double Bob Graham round record holder. They were able to sort of give me the perspective on kind of today, with your sort of how you train for it and how you eat for it and all these things. Whereas back in the day when Alan and his buddies were doing it, one of their gang was Bill Foster, is a farmer who farmed on Great Whernside. I think his farm was in Kettlewell. And there's a snippet in the book that's about Bill, who, because the Fellsman used to set off from Grassington at lunchtime. So Bill had tended to his flock all morning on Great Whernside, tipped up in Grassington, done the Fellsman 55 miles, he didn't do the bit about going into the pub, he just signed off, dashed back, because it was the following morning by the time they finished, and did some more farming on Great Whernside, which thought amazing. So more fabulous pictures. This is just these are just probably two of my favorite pictures really that I thought I'd just include. On the left you have the 220 yard final, hang on, I'm saying that right, 220 yard final at Clapham Sports in 1958. It's just such a dynamic, brilliant picture. You get the sense of this sort of busy sports. You've got John Saffrey, local man, winning, just pipping Wally MacArthur to the post. He's not local. He's actually a very highly noted sprinter. He professional rugby league player, played throughout the 50s, played for Rochdale Hornets, Blackpool Borough, Workington Town and Salford, sort of moving between those different clubs. So he was the back marker. So he's flown, this will have been some race, he's flown through from the back mark and just narrowly missed not clinching it. obviously, you know, he was the fastest runner on the field, but, you know, it made for a great race having it so closely pitched like that. On the right, you've got the indomitable Jeff Norman leading Harry Walker over Ingleborough in 1973. Jeff, who eventually in 1976 represented Great Britain in the Montreal Olympics in the marathon, is still is credited with the fastest traverse of the three peaks. This year he broke and set a new record, which was just under the 2.5 hour mark. And it's, even though the record is, it's not his record now because they've changed the course, so that changes what the record is. His time of 2 hours 29 minutes and 53 seconds, you know, that is the fastest traverse of the three peaks that there's ever been, if that makes sense. So that's a cracking picture. And then sort of, as I sort of wind up in a sense, I don't know how long I've been talking for. Hang on, I can't even see my clock. Oh yeah, probably just on time, that's good. So I just wanted to give great credit to two other people who collaborated or shared their work with the book to make it the book it is. So Victoria Alderson on the left, she created the cover image. She's a local artist and illustrator, and she, I think I bought her a bottle of champagne as a thank you. She created the cover image, she did images inside. I mean, she did, you know, she just did it for sort of friendship, which was lovely. Because I think the cover image, because it is a negative image, if that makes sense, was quite a difficult thing to achieve. She had to sort of paint the reverse of what was going to appear in gold leaf on the front of the book. And then inside she did an image of the wrestlers, because I didn't have one of the wrestlers kind of in action, and she's done another one of the hound trails because I couldn't find photos for that, so I thought it'd be nice to kind of mix things up with a few nice illustrations. And there's a little sort of old fell boot that sort of reappears throughout the book. James Innerdale, well, I'll just sort of backtrack. I recognised after, when you start reading the book, that, you know, in each of the chapters you're talking about crying a bottom and coming off, you know, Simon Fell down into Sellside, you know, and if for somebody that doesn't have kind of the Ingleborough landscape really fixed in their mind, it could be pretty confusing. So really thought, oh, I need a map, you know, and I'm saying to my husband, do you think you can draw a map? I need some sort of map. And then I discovered this wonderful illustrative map of Ingleborough on I think it's on the Stories in Stone or the website, or the Yorkshire Dales Millennium Trust website, and a few emails with them and with James Innerdale, the creator of this beautiful map. He really kindly agreed to let me use it as the end papers. So there's now a map that maps on the sort of the end papers at each end of the book, which really sort of tops and tails it, and it's a beautiful reference point for people who are maybe getting a little bit confused with the changing routes of things throughout the book. So yeah, so as I said earlier, the second enhanced edition is out now, which is slightly different to the first. It's got a slightly lighter colour cover. So made a few small changes. So I've added it was a sporting, Ingleborough Sporting Legacy was the previous subtitle. So I felt I just wanted to get, in addition to Ingleborough, I wanted to get the words Three Peaks in there. So I've added that in. I've added the new photograph. There's a little bit of new content about the first women to take their bikes around the peaks, which again came out post publication of the first book. So and that again preceded the first race. Yeah, so that preceded the first Three Peaks cyclocross race, and updated race records as well. And the new colour means it's just readily identifiable. And then finally, while I've got the limelight, I would like to tell you all about a forthcoming photographic exhibition, which is sort of nothing to do with this book per se, but it's to do with me, because I've brought it together. And if you're interested in the Yorkshire Dales, beautiful photography of the Yorkshire Dales, and fell running, then hopefully you'll be interested in this exhibition. And this is at the Folly, and this launches on May the 18th, and it goes from there to the Dales Countryside Museum in Hawes. So the photographs are by Stephen Garnett, and they're all fell running, beautiful, amazing, because he's a very talented photographer, current fell running images. But I'm also going to be curating in the glass cases a kind of a fell running artifacts through the ages sort of artifacts exhibition. So Ken has very kindly offered to let me borrow, for example, some of the items that are in his collection to do with the old Clapham sports. They'll be in there. I'm going to be able to showcase kind of fell running shoes through the ages. My dad's still got a pair of the old leather boots. And then a very champion fell runner, Tommy Sedgwick, who won Grasmere Guides and Kilnsey Crag Race. Miraculously, he's kept all these fell boots forever. So I can piece together how fell shoes have changed, and that's going to be in the cases. Dave Hodgson's lending me his second place Three Peaks medal from back in like 1960 something. That's going to go in. So programs, other bits, photos, things like that. So that launches on May 18th at the Folly. And then if you're looking for any more information about the book or the exhibition, these are the two addresses that are useful. And that's me. Thank you. Shall I? So thank you very much. I'll hand back to Jill. Oh no, I'm getting questions, aren't I, Pam?
Yeah, you're going to have questions now.
Yeah. What do you want me to do with that? Do you want me just to leave this on the screen?
Or if you get rid of that, probably, then we can actually see who's asking questions. That would be great, Victoria.
So
please.
do I stop share, John? I do, don't I?
You do exactly that.
Yeah, stop share.
That's lovely. Thank you. That's great. Thank you very much. Well, I've only had one question actually sent directly to me, and that's from Marjorie Dowling. And she would like to know, was Billy Bland, the rugby player from Wigan, any relation to Gilpin Bland? Do you know or not?
You know, I could do with my dad here for that. There's two sort of Bland families. One with you've got the running Blands and you've got the wrestling Blands.
Right. Yes.
Because Peter Bland, the sports shop owner, sadly died. Now Billy Bland, I don't know. I can definitely ask my dad.
Right.
You can email that out if.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah.
So what was that question? Is Billy? Just repeat that. Or do you want to email me afterwards?
Can I help?
Well,
I think I can help here.
Yeah. Okay, Margaret. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I'm right in saying that there's Bill Bland who lives in Kirby Mallam at the moment, and he's one of the 5 brothers.
Oh, right.
The
Okay.
family came from the South Lakes and farmed at Dunsop Bridge for many years. And and when I was young and I was a teenager, they were all there. And they had one daughter as well as the 5 boys, and she was at school with me at the grammar school in Clitheroe. And I've just been in touch with Bill, and they're all wrestlers, and their father was Gilpin, but they then went back to the Lake District from Dunsop Bridge around early 60s, something like that, 1960s.
That's great. Thank you. That's excellent.
I think I've got a photograph of Bill Bland from Kirby Mallam wrestling, probably at Grasmere.
Really? Right.
Yeah.
Is that in the Grasmere? I borrowed my dad's Grasmere book, the Grasmere 150 years, and that has some amazing pictures of the
No, this would be just a snapshot. It'll be in Mallamdale Local History Group archive.
Right.
Of which I'm the archivist.
So, right. Has anybody else got any questions they'd like to ask? We got.
Do you know John and Tom Murphy, who were spectacular winners of the father and son partnership in the European cyclocross, about 3 or 4 years ago?
Do I know John and who?
John Murphy and his son.
Oh yes, I do. Tom and John are in the book.
Right.
Yeah, so I interviewed them both. So there's a quote from John in the book, and there's a picture of Tom. And I used to work with Julia. That was easy to sort out.
That was, yes. Does anybody else have any questions? Let's see, is anybody? Everybody's being very quiet.
I don't know whether you're interested, but
Yeah, Margaret.
I knew Jim Leeming very well, both when I was a child, and he married my primary school teacher, and I knew him. Yeah.
Oh yes, she was a teacher. Oh, because I was there for hours. I read the whole story.
Yeah, he married twice. I've got it. He's in actually in one of my books actually about the First World War, and he married. His first wife died of cancer in the.
That's right. There was a book. Yes, I did. I read. There's a little book about him. That's right. She wrote it, didn't she? Second wife, did she?
No, this is mine's a recent one about all those in the Hodder Valley in the First World War.
Right. Okay.
But, yeah, because he fought in
Yes.
not in the Battle of the Somme, I think, but he fought on the Somme. He was probably about 18, and they reckon that was why he walked so far when he was training in the army, that he could outrun everybody in the village.
Yes, he got into his running when he came back from the war. That's right. Yeah. Oh, that's
Fascinating.
how lovely. Yeah, I just found that such a, I don't know, it really sort of captivated me. Did his whole story. It was really, and it was really lovely to read the transcripts of, because he was interviewed, and it was like the questions and the answers, and just to read the whole sort of way he grew up in the village. It was really interesting.
He was a church warden and goodness knows what in the village. Everybody knew Jim. Yeah. Lovely man.
Yeah, and then he went back and he was a starter, I think, at Burnsall Sports back in the 70s. He sort of was guest of honour, which I think was a really proud moment for him.
I've got a cutting of that somewhere in one of my files here.
Yeah, lovely.
Anybody else? Has anybody else got any questions? No? Nobody else? But in that case, I would like to thank you, Victoria, for what has been a fascinating history that you've managed to pull together. And I think you've demonstrated all the hidden stories that are still out there in family collections, just waiting for somebody like you to sort of go around talking to people and discovering them. And it's been fascinating. And I think also you've managed to bring to life the races and the stories and things about, and it was something that was so important to those communities, because that was the only live sport they were watching. They couldn't sort of switch the televisions on. It would be a great, you know, it was a great event in all these different communities each year. And through the book, I think also you've immortalized so many names that, you know, I hadn't heard of, but, you know, it's nice that their stories are now in print and they can go on. So I would like to thank you very much. And I hope that the second edition is as successful as the first. So, and I shall definitely have a look at your the exhibition in the Folly later on this year. So
yeah, lovely.
It'll be something to look forward to. So thank you very much. And
thank
everybody, we can't all sort of clap, but you can see everybody clapping. So thank you.